Welcome to part 3 of this analysis of the first Harry Potter film using the lens of the hero's journey. In part 2, we covered crossing the first threshold, which is the 5th step of the hero's journey as articulated by Chris Vogler in his book The Writer's Journey. And then we covered test allies and enemies. And that series of tests and then introducing the allies and the enemies took quite a lot of space because there were a lot of tests. Partly the story has to not only build up Harry entering the special world and starting to acquire skills that he needs in the wizarding world, but it also builds up enmities and friendships that will last right through the 7 books of the series, or 8 films. They split the last book into 2 films. So that's what we covered. That takes us to the next step, which is approach to the inmost cave. Now, we ended up with Harry, Ron and Hermione thinking correctly that Voldemort is after the Philosopher's Stone, but they also think incorrectly that Snape is helping Voldemort and is the one who is trying to get past Fluffy and the other sorceress guarding spells to get to where Dumbledore has hidden the Philosopher's Stone in Hogwarts, so that he can then give it to Voldemort to help give Voldemort a body, because at the moment he's disincorporated. He's basically a wraith. They go and see Hagrid, and Hagrid lets slip that Fluffy sleeps when music plays, and that he's shared that info with a mysterious person who he met in the pub who gave him a dragon egg and bought him a drink, I think. And Hagrid can be a bit garrulous and let slip things that he shouldn't let slip. And it's a little plot thing that's used to reveal pieces of information that help forward the plot at various points in the story. Dumbledore gets called away from Hogwarts on ministry business, and Harry and Hermione and Ron decide to act to try and get the Philosopher's Stone and keep it from Voldemort. And the event that triggers that decision is that Harry's head starts to hurt, which tells him there's danger or Voldemort's around. It's a physical signal that acts to cue both him and us that there's potential peril in place. So Harry, Ron and Hermione get to the 3rd floor and they go to where Fluffy is, and there's an enchanted harp playing, and Fluffy is asleep. As they try and lift one of his massive paws from the trapdoor, the music stops playing and Fluffy wakes up, and they basically have to jump down to avoid Fluffy, and Fluffy slams his paw on the trapdoor, which means they've got no choice. If they thought about going back, there's no chance of going back. They've got to go forwards to get to where the Philosopher's Stone is, and then hopefully from there they can go back to Hogwarts. They now face 3 tests, and each of the 3 of them excel in one of the tests. And in the latest version of Chris Vogler's book, The Writer's Journey, he has got some additional information that's not in any of the previous volumes. The previous editions were on the 4th. The 25th anniversary edition is effectively the 4th edition, and he's got some additional information on the ally archetype. And what he basically says in the 25th anniversary edition about the ally, and he mentions it in the context of 2 characters, but there's no reason why it can't be expanded to incorporate 3 as it is here, is that when you have allies, sometimes some of the bonding between multiple characters to be allies results in skills coming from different characters to create a larger skill set that the hero on his own doesn't have. And that happens in this instance when the Ron and Hermione and Harry are trying to go through the sorcerer's warding spells to get to the Philosopher's Stone. So, in the first chamber, Hermione uses, or the first spell, uses her knowledge of spells to guide them past the Devil's Snare. And that's knowledge that she gained in class, in studying in the library. It's basically herbology. In the second test, Harry has to catch the golden key with the broken wing so they can open the next door. And there's a whole host of keys trying to stop him, enchanted keys. And basically, he has to use the skills that we've seen him display in the Quidditch matches, where he's the seeker going after the golden snitch. So the golden key is very much like the golden snitch. So again, these skills, where they're interesting is that they were set up and foreshadowed earlier in the story, so that when we get to this point, we don't doubt that Harry can ride the broomstick, and that he can, once he identifies which is the key that they need to open the next door, that he can fly and catch it. Even though there is tension with the keys trying to stop him and trying to attack him, we don't for a second doubt that he has the skills to do this, because they've been established earlier in the story. And that's the same with the third test, where Ron has to guide them through a game of wizard chess where the pieces are life-size and they literally destroy each other, and Ron and Hermione and Harry take the part of various pieces. And an interesting little foreshadowing thing here, which has got like thematic resonance throughout the whole series. To win the game, Ron has to sacrifice his piece and put himself in potential danger. And while he's nervous about doing it, he knows that's the only way for the game to be won and for Harry to be able to progress to try and meet the overall goal, which is to get to the Philosopher's Stone. So important to note that not only did we see Ron playing wizard chess at Christmas with Harry, so we know that Ron can play wizard chess, but he wins by sacrificing his piece and potentially getting hurt. So as I've mentioned, all of these skills have been set up and foreshadowed. And then, because Ron is hurt in that sacrificial move, which opens up the game so that Harry can checkmate the opposing, I think it's a queen, I can't remember the pieces, but I think it's a queen. Harry asks Hermione to look after Ron, and he goes forward into the last chamber alone to face what he thinks is Snape. And notice that from a mythical point of view, this is very much a descent, which is very much a part of mythical stories, when they get to this point where the hero has to descend into the bowels of the earth to face the final monster or the final challenge. So J.K. Rowling, obviously very cognizant of myths and legends. You can see it in all of the backstory and the world building that's in the Harry Potter books and films. Things like centaurs and goblins and dragons and magical swords. All of these tropes are familiar from mythology, but they get a unique spin by bringing them into the wizarding world that she sets up for Harry to inhabit over the course of the 7 stories of the cycle. So Harry goes forward and downwards and goes into the supreme ordeal. The first thing to note is that Harry doesn't face Snape, it's Quirrell, and he's the adversary, and he reveals that Snape was actually trying to protect Harry at the Quidditch game. And Quirrell said if the fire hadn't caused the stampede of people and knocked him over so he broke his eye line, Snape's, I think Quirrell says something like, Snape's pathetic counterspell wouldn't have protected Harry. But Quirrell is stood in front of the Mirror of Erised, which is obviously something that Harry discovered at Christmas in the Test Allies and Enemies phase, and saw his parents in there. So we knew Dumbledore had taken the mirror away. We didn't know where he'd taken it. And it's revealed it's in this chamber where the Supreme Ordeal will take place. Harry's head starts to hurt again, and we hear a whispered, "Use the boy" piece of dialogue, and Harry doesn't know where that's coming from. Quirrell gets Harry to look into the mirror, and Harry sees himself within the mirror with the stone in his pocket, and he feels in his pocket, and the stone's there, and i.e. Quirrell doesn't know it's there, and the stone is away from Quirrell. But what Harry does when Quirrell said, "What do you see?" is he repeats what Ron said he saw in the mirror in the earlier scene where Harry took Ron to see the mirror, and Ron saw, "It's the House Cup. Dumbledore's giving it to me. I won at Quidditch," and those things. So Harry just uses that line to try and confuse Quirrell and mislead him as to where the stone actually is. But Quirrell then reveals, by taking his turban off, that Voldemort is basically sharing Quirrell's body, and we can see Voldemort in the mirror as Quirrell looks at Harry. Voldemort tells Harry and tries to entice him by saying that if he gets the stone and gives it to Voldemort, he'll bring his parents back to life, which, again, going back to the Mirror of Erised and the scene at Christmas, Harry saw his parents there, and remember, he says to Ron, "It can't be the future because my parents are dead." So we know that Harry would love his parents to be alive again, but he knows that that's a lie, and he calls Voldemort a liar. Voldemort orders Quirrell to kill Harry, and Quirrell knocks Harry to the ground, and he's trying to strangle him, but Harry puts his hands onto Quirrell, and if you note in that scene, before he puts his hand onto Quirrell's hands to try and get them off his neck, Harry had been touching the Philosopher's Stone. So there are various interpretations of what happens next with Quirrell's flesh turning to ash, where Harry touching him comes from. That's possibly one of them. Dumbledore says it's to do with the fact that his mother sacrificed her own life rather, to try and stop Voldemort killing him, and that sacrificial love is something that Quirrell couldn't abide and couldn't live with. We'll look at these kind of questions in the fourth part of this series when we look at some of the writing lessons from the story, because although I personally believe the stories are great, and I mean, I will forever be grateful to J.K. Rowling, because my eldest son, when he was 9 or 10 or 11, didn't read at all, and he was given Harry Potter by, I think, his grandparents for Christmas, and he got it and he loved it and he read them all, and it'd be nice if he read some more, but he tends to consume stories with movies and TV series these days. But when he was a teenager, he did a lot of reading, and it was all thanks to the Harry Potter books. So we'll look at some of the writing lessons, and we'll talk about some of the magic, because sometimes the magic just isn't quite... it's probably the least evolved piece of the world building, and sometimes there are things that happen just for one story, and then they don't happen again. The video to watch before I get to that one, if you're interested, is the Brandon Sanderson lecture on Sanderson's 3 Laws of Magic. He talks about laws of magic for fantasy, and it's worth having a look at that video before we get to the next one. Anyway, so Harry puts his hands on Quirrell. Quirrell's hands turn to ash, and then Harry puts his hands onto Quirrell's face, and his face just starts to turn to ash, and then he falls on the floor and his body dissolves in a pile of ash, and Harry just picks up the stone. And that's the Supreme Ordeal pretty much done. although in the actual scene there are two more things that happen. So as Harry's picked up the stone and is preparing to leave the chamber, Voldemort's wraith forms from the ashes of Quirrell's body behind Harry, and then it flies away, but it flies through Harry, causing Harry to collapse. The stone drops from his hand and he's unconscious. These things are, I think, part of a different pair of steps of the hero's journey. Before we identify them, we'll just look at the next four stages, the final four stages in the hero's journey. They are the reward, which is usually when the hero goes through the supreme ordeal and he, whatever the reward of the supreme ordeal is, he gets. There's the road back. Sometimes in myth, the hero is chased back from the special world by the supernatural beings who are not happy that the hero has claimed whatever the reward is. There's a final ordeal, life and death sequence, which Chris Vogler calls the resurrection. And then there's return to the ordinary world with the elixir, with the greater knowledge. This step, by the way, is often missed by people telling hero's journey stories, and it's actually one of the most important stories. One of the most important stages in the story, because the hero, whether it's a male or female, learns. Their character grows. They learn through the course of the story, and then it's important that they go back to their tribe and share the knowledge that they've learned, so that the tribe can learn, and so that knowledge that has been hard fought for doesn't just vanish, but all the tribe can learn from it. But that step's often missed in lots of contemporary stories that use the hero's journey to form the structural spine of the story. And it's worth noting the hero's journey is a set of guidelines. It's not a blueprint. So it's not you have to go from the ordinary world to the call to adventure, to refusal of the call, to meeting with the mentor. Some stages can be omitted, or some stages can be suggested with a well-chosen visual or a well-chosen piece of dialogue, or just literally one or two lines. They don't have to have so much development in each of the scenes. And also, so in this story, if we think back to the first video that I did on looking at this film through the lens of the hero's journey, the refusal of the call was quite an extended sequence, which comprised Mr. Dursley trying to stop Harry getting the letters by burning them, then by nailing up the letterbox, and when that didn't work and letters were coming down the chimney, he then took them away to a deserted island, and Hagrid came and delivered the call to adventure. So the different stages can expand or contract depending on the needs of the stories. So they're not necessarily have to be in order, and they don't all have to have an even weight, and sometimes a particular stage can expand, as we saw with test allies and enemies, and sometimes stages can contract, as we'll see here, because I think the reward is when Harry picks up the Philosopher's Stone after Quirrell is killed, and so sequentially, according to how Vogler lays it out, the reward is that Voldemort's not going to get the stone because Harry's defeated Quirrell and Voldemort no longer has a body to inhabit and he's now just a wraith. But Harry gets some further rewards after the resurrection scene. The road back, in myth, the hero is pursued from the special world, as I mentioned. I don't think that really happens in this story, although you could argue that Voldemort going through his wraith, going through Harry's body and causing him to collapse, is a final life or death ordeal, and it's a combination of the road back and the resurrection in some respects. So those two parts of the hero's journey sequence are very quick, and there's a slightly longer reward sequence after the resurrection, which is the next sequence. So Harry wakes up in hospital. He wakes up and there are get well cards and there are lots of gifts. Dumbledore walks in, tells Harry that the stone is destroyed, and this dialogue is very low key. You can find this scene on YouTube, so it's worth going and checking out. But there are two key lessons contained within this scene. So when Dumbledore tells Harry that the stone is destroyed, Harry immediately intuits that means Nicholas Flamel is going to die, because that's what's been extending his life. And Dumbledore confirms that that's what's going to happen, and basically said he's chosen to die rather than leave a power that could tempt someone like Voldemort in the world. So they're going to destroy the stone. And the second thing is, Harry asks how he could get the stone from the mirror, and Dumbledore says he placed it within the mirror, that only people who wanted the stone but didn't want to use it for their own purposes could get it. We'll see this idea in the final film, in the denouement, but this is a really powerful contemporary lesson to use in storytelling. And the other great fantasy story that uses it is Lord of the Rings. And if you remember, in Lord of the Rings, the Gandalf and Frodo and the Council of Elrond have got the one ring which Sauron is searching for. And Sauron, the thing that terrifies Sauron the most, is that one of the, whether it's Gandalf, whether it's Saruman, whether it's Aragorn, once Aragorn reveals himself to Sauron in the Palantir with the reforged sword, he's terrified that one of those people will take the One Ring and will use its power to wield against Sauron. It never in a million years occurs to him, until it's too late, that they're actually trying to take it to Mount Doom and destroy it, because they don't want it in the world. And that kind of idea is found within the Harry Potter sequence, and we'll see it right at the end in the final movie. But it's here as well, not just with Harry, so he can get it because he wants it, but he wants it to keep it away from Voldemort. He doesn't want it to use it for his own ends. But Flamel also does that. He chooses to die rather than leave the stone in the world, which could entice Voldemort to try and get it again. And if you think back to what we talked about with how Ron won the chess game, he won it by sacrificing his piece, which led to damage, because we saw the enchanted pieces smashing the crap out of each other. But that was the only way for Harry to go forward. So he sacrificed his piece, knowing that he might get hurt, so that Harry could move forward and try and fulfill the goal that the three of them had come up with, which was to keep the stone out of Voldemort's hand, because they don't want Voldemort using it to regain a body and then start bringing evil into the world. So it's a really powerful lesson, really, really subtle. And if you're not watching closely and not thinking about it, it might just pass you by. And those two things you might miss completely. You can find the scene where Harry wakes up in hospital on YouTube. It's like 3.5 minutes long, 4 minutes long, something like that. Search for it and just watch it and look out for those things. They're very low key, but they're there, and they are things that power the story climax at the end of the 8th movie. Okay, we then go from the resurrection. Harry gets out of hospital, sees Ron and Hermione, and they're all happy, and we go to the end of term feast. Now, Slytherin have won the House Cup, and Gryffindor our last. But Dumbledore announces, because of what's happened with the Philosopher's Stone, there are some extra points to award. And he gives Hermione and Ron an extra 50 points each, and Harry gets an extra 60 points for his courage and bravery. And those extra points mean that there's a tie between Gryffindor and Slytherin. But then, and this is another really subtle but really important plot point, Neville, who stood up to Harry and Hermione and Ron earlier and said they shouldn't be going out because Gryffindor might lose points, but Hermione, if I remember, she petrified him so that he couldn't stop them going. Because of that, Dumbledore gave Neville an extra 10 points so that Gryffindor win the House Cup, but Neville gets the kudos of being a hero and being the one whose 10 points took Gryffindor over the line. And I think this is an important part of Neville's development, which we'll see later on in the sequence of stories. And again, there are things that happen in the stories that, until you get to the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th film, you don't realise how important they were. This is one of those. When you're first watching this, it's just like, oh yeah, that's cool, blah, blah, blah. But it's not, because that's part of the, you could almost call it an inciting event for Neville's hero's journey, which turns him from a kind of bumbling, overweight, unsure child into someone who's got the strength to rally everyone in the ruins of Hogwarts when they think Harry's been killed. So I think that starts here. So that's, again, a really important little plot point that you can miss if you're not careful. The final stage of the hero's journey is the return with the elixir. I don't think that stage is really represented so much in this film. But Hagrid, just as the school kids are boarding the train to Hogwarts, the train from Hogwarts to take them home at the end of the school year, gives Harry a picture of his parents. So Harry's got something that he can remember his parents by. And the elixir that Harry really takes away is the knowledge that he has a home and friends and people who love him at Hogwarts and who value him for who he is. And that's kind of his increased sense of self-esteem with the trials and tribulations that he's been through. And there's a line of dialogue where Hermione says something like, "Are you looking forward to going home?" And he says, "I'm not going home, not really." And it tells us that he knows his place is at Hogwarts, and he belongs there. And the journey he's been through in this first school year has completely turned his life around, and he's starting to develop into the wizard that he will be at the end of the sequence, when the wizarding world have to really face up to the challenge that Voldemort and Voldemort's allies bring to the wizarding world. Okay, so in the final episode of this 4-part look at the first Harry Potter film, we're going to look at some writing lessons from the analysis that we've covered over the last, over this video and the 2 previous ones. And I think you'll find some interesting things there. As I've talked about the various things, I've already mentioned things that are worth looking out for that you could maybe work into your writing and your story forming. But we'll look at some explicit writing lessons in the next part. If you've got any questions on anything or want to ask anything, just email me. I'm at paul@deliberate-practice.com. And if you're a frustrated and or aspiring fiction writer, I've got a resource called the Writing Vault. You can see the URL there. The URL is also in the description underneath this video. And one of the things that will go into the Writing Vault, when I put all of these videos in and I put fractal outlines that are time-stamped into them as well, I will also find some of these clips that I've talked about, like for example the resurrection scene where Dumbledore and Harry are talking in the hospital, and I'll embed those into the body of the text underneath where I embed these videos as well. So it will really help bring the lessons and the things that I've been talking to life with much more detail. So if you're in the Writing Vault, and it's a monthly membership, but it's not expensive, and there's lots in there, and you get more than the $7 a month that it is just in bonuses for joining. So do go check that out, see what you think. If you've got any questions about that, use the same email address. So thank you for watching this video. I'll catch you in the next one where we look at the writing lessons from the first Harry Potter film.